Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We want to do a little preamble at the beginning of this stream. We're going to do regular programming as we normally do, but there is one thing that we wanted to do at the outset, which is take a look at some debugger projects that have been ongoing. One of the things that I've said oftentimes is I'd like to get rid of the Microsoft products that are involved in building games on Windows or anywhere else. That reason is just because they're continuing to get worse, and so the writing's kind of on the wall. I would like to replace them with things that are going to get better and not worse, much like I replaced Emacs with 4Coder and kind of saved myself from that sinking ship. So one of the things we'd like to do on Handmade Hero is replace Microsoft's Visual Studio debugger, which is the one that we're currently using, with a debugger that's actually built by people who want to make debugging better, faster, easier, quicker, with more visibility into the things we care about, rather than making it bloated and more slow and take more space and take 50 million gigabytes on your hard drive and install an SQL server and all the other things, none of which I'm actually exaggerating, it actually does to this day. So we want to do these things, and I want to talk briefly a little bit about it. I'm going to try two on stream today, CodeClap and CDBG. They're both Handmade network projects, and I'm really happy that people have been trying this. I want to say a brief thing about coding tools and just a little bit of, I think, what the problem with coding tools is these days. I just wanted to quickly say some things about it, and also just address some things about open source that some people may want to hear some perspectives on from people like me who program in the industry. One thing that I think is a huge problem, and I think this has a lot to do with open source right now, is that while open source is a good thing in certain ways, it allows people to contribute to projects and fix bugs in projects, and it allows a lot of collaboration that works pretty well. So I feel like there's a lot to be said for it. It has a problem, which is that people don't get paid a lot of the time. And that there's two ways of looking at that. One way of looking at that is like, well, maybe if they wanted to get paid, they shouldn't have put it up as open source, or maybe they should get paid in some ancillary way, or maybe people don't deserve to get paid to program. I don't know what your philosophy is on it. But philosophy aside, what the end result is that a lot of tools that fall into the programming niche aren't very good. And the reason they're not very good is because there is no money there to support people making alternatives. And that's the problem, right? There are people right now, in fact, one of the debuggers that we're going to look at, CDBG, is being worked on by somebody who would work on it full time if they could figure out a way to get paid to do so, right? And that's a failure of the economic model because we desperately need new debuggers. The debuggers we have are garbage, right? But a debugger is a big undertaking. You can't expect somebody to come out with a debugger tomorrow that's better than Visual Studio and then start selling it. There needs to be capital invested and there to be payouts waiting for people who are going to go do the work of doing these things, and they need ways to survive in the meantime. The capital has to be there for them to do it. So we need to find ways to fund these projects, right? We need to find better ways of funding these projects. And I feel like open source needs to find better ways to address those problems, because the open source part ends up producing lots of tools for free, most of which are bad, right? And once in a while it produces something good, but a lot of times the only reason it produces something good is because people are paid to work on it. The Linux kernel, Clang, these things have massive monetary pushes behind them now, and there's people getting employed to work on them, right? Smaller products just don't have that option, right? There is no giant Google fund that's just going to give somebody money to work on this debugger, or if there is, it's not currently doing that. And the question is, how do we get it to do that, right? So I do think there's a bit of an economics problem that we have, and that economics problem is why our tools are crappy. I don't have a suggestion for solving the problem, and I'm not trying to throw shade on anyone's existing economic models or open source, because I don't have the answer to it. I just want to point out that there's a problem there that we kind of need to solve, because I don't know how we're going to get good tools otherwise. People end up having to kill themselves to try and get these things done in their spare time. And so it's not fair. They should be getting paid to do this work. It's work we need done, and we don't have money to fund, right? And when I say we, I don't mean me personally. in some specific way, I mean the community that needs these tools, right? Game developers, low-level programmers, whatever. And so I don't know how you address that problem. We have the Handmade Fund, which when we have money, we give it to people, but it doesn't collect very much money. It collects a few $100s, like $700-800 a month, and we pay that out to Handmade Network for hosting and Miblo for doing the annotated episode guide and so on. We just don't have the kind of money necessary to pay full-time programmers on any project, let alone a number of products that would be important. So that's not really an answer. And I don't know what is an answer, right? That's about all I have to say on that front. And I think it's an issue that people need to address at some point. That's all. Because open source currently is really bad at getting over that hump. And I don't know how you fix it to be able to do that, but it needs to do that somehow. And it can be closed source too, right? So anyway, that's part A. And part B is the knock-on from that is I've definitely been asked a couple times by people about whether they think whether I think they should release their thing as open source or not. And the thing that I say is, if you've put a lot of programming time into something, people should have to pay for it. You should get paid for your programming. So there are ways of doing open source projects that still involve getting paid. I would highly encourage looking into one of them. For example, you can do a private repository that everyone that buys the thing gets access to, right? We do that on Handmade Hero, for example. If you pre-order the game, you get access to the source code, right? That's a perfectly reasonable compromise between open source and paid that still allows you to sell something and get money for it, but also provide access to the source code for people who need it, right? And so I would highly encourage people to not feel bad about charging for their work. If you feel bad about charging for your work, that's not a good situation. You should always feel like good programming deserves to be paid for. And any ideology that doesn't believe that has a significant issue. If we eventually move to a world where people all just have their needs met and they could all just go get food for free or whatever in some kind of, socialist utopia, great. Nobody needs to get paid for programming more. But when you still need to put food on the table for your family, or just even yourself, you need to get paid for your work. And this is real work. It's hard work to do. You should get paid for it. So never feel bad about that, ever. Everyone else gets paid for their work. You should get paid for yours. It's that simple. That's how society currently functions. And until they change the rest of it and people don't get paid for driving cars or building buildings or anything else, you should get paid for doing programming work. All right. So that public service message aside, let's talk about the two debuggers that we've got today. They're in very different states, I would say. I've played with them just only slightly, so we'll kind of be exploring them mostly on stream. Just a little bit, and then I'm going to move over to regular programming. So we're not going to try to switch to either of them today. We're just going to see what state they're in, just taking a quick little look. What I would say is, from briefly looking at them, I would say that CDBG is the less mature in terms of features, debugging features, but it is very, very usable. The human factors are there. It's clean. It runs really well. And it's immediately usable. I was really impressed by how close they are to having something that's just drop in and you never think about Visual Studio again. CodeClap is sort of the opposite. It looks like it's got a lot more features debugging wise. It's got disassembly. It's got a lot of things that CDBG doesn't have yet, but it's the opposite in terms of human factors. It's almost impenetrable, I would say, in terms of trying to start using it. It takes a very big upfront investment to even figure out how to get it to work. And so I feel like they're both at very different places where they each have something that's kind of a little bit far behind where a finished product would be, but both have shown remarkable progress in terms of what they've got. And so I think you'll see as we go into them, they both have different strengths and weaknesses, but they've both gotten to the point where you can debug programs, which is pretty cool. And especially CDBG, I was impressed with, because my understanding is they don't even use Microsoft's PDB parser. They actually use their own, which is kind of awesome, because that means you could parse the PDB completely independent of having any sort of Microsoft help. I don't know if that's really true, but it sounded like that was true, which is pretty hardcore. Anyway, so to the best of my knowledge, CDBG is publicly available. You can download it from Handmade Network, so if you want to try it yourself, you just can. CodeClap, to the best of my knowledge, is not publicly available, but I think it will eventually be sold. I think it's going to be sold on itch.io. Don't quote me on that, but that's where I got mine from, like sort of an early access thing. So I believe CodeClap will be available for purchase on itch.io once it is ready to go. I don't know when that is exactly. Again, like I said at the beginning of the stream, I would highly encourage both teams. Well, I think CDBG is made by one person. I don't know how many people work on CodeClap. I would highly encourage both of them to charge for your work. You've both done a lot of work, and you're both on the verge of having a debugger that people could really use. Get paid for it. You should get paid for it. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at these two. I'm going to start with CDBG first because I think it's much easier to use than CodeClap is, but it's a little less far along in terms of debugging. So let's just take a look at that and see where it's at, right? So if you want to launch it, I believe it's the same exact way that you would launch Visual Studio. You can just type it from the command line and it should launch. We should be able to basically pass command line, I think, but I don't remember. So it may be that you have to fill out in the actual program. So we'll try launching it, but I don't know if you can do that or not. We'll see. Oops, sorry, it's not in Handmade. It's in build, went through to handmade.exe. So I'm going to try and launch that, and we'll see. So here you can see that even just right off the bat, they've done a nice thing here, which is they've made the interface look roughly similar to Visual Studio or another standard debugger like Qt Creator or something. Again, this is pretty nice because if you want to do something like fundamentally change the user interface, you're going to incur an overhead for people to switch to it. Now, you may have a really good reason of changing the interface. Maybe you've got some really great ideas on how to make the interface way better. In that case, go for it. But if you don't have any ideas on how to make the interface way better, maybe you only have ideas to make it a little bit better, or maybe you just want to make it different because you want to make it different, not a great idea. Why make people relearn how to debug a program in order to switch to your thing? Just give them the same interface they're used to on Visual Studio and just make a better debugger, right? And add to it, So one of the things you have to remember is don't change things unless you have a way of making them way better. Don't change something just to change it, right? In terms of user interface. That doesn't really make any sense. All you're doing is adding a barrier to entry there. So I like what they've done here. They basically said, look, it's going to come up the same way as Visual Studio. We even have the keys bound the same. F5 starts the process. F10 steps over and F11 steps through. Great. I don't even have to relearn key combinations. Fantastic, right? That's a great idea. There's also tilde to access the console. I don't know what the console is, so that doesn't really help me, but we'll play around it and see what happens. It says here that I can do ls keys to list a bunch of keys, so there they are. So don't know how to use this again, but we'll play around with it a little. All right, so I don't know if I was able to pass my executable on the command line, but I'll tell you what, it's printing out here in the title bar, so it looks like it probably did. That's great if that's actually true. I'm going to hit F11 to step. Here we are at the start of our program. Now, my understanding, I thought that the developer of this said that he didn't support parsing of optimized code in the PDB, which I think is what we're looking at right now. So I may have to compile in debug mode, but so far what he did is working. When I hit step in, I landed at our startup. Hitting F10 is stepping through the code exactly as Visual Studio would probably have done. So he may have been underselling it. Maybe he means that like the inspection doesn't work or something, I'm not sure. But I'll be honest with you, the inspection doesn't work in Visual Studio in release mode either, so not sure that's something I can really talk about. But yeah, so for example, I don't know that we would be able to find instance even in Visual Studio, so I wouldn't hold that against this particular program. I hit Shift F5 to stop, and it stopped. Again, really love that feature. I don't have to learn anything to use this thing. It just feels like the same debugger I'm used to, only guess what? When I hit the step key, I have to wait 12 seconds for it to go to the next line. Excellent work here. Really, really like it. It feels great. Let's compile Handmade Hero in debug mode so that we can do a test of this in the way that we would normally debug, because Visual Studio doesn't handle doesn't handle release mode executables anyway. Even though we passed the switch that supposedly allows it to do so, it doesn't handle them anyway. So let's just debug the way we would normally debug, which is with the debug PDB. And let's take a look at how this does. So here we go. I'm going to step in here. And now I'm going to try and take a look at one of these. It looks like it parsed this instance just fine. I'm looking at the value here. Again, don't know if these are correct, but they certainly look correct. Here we're going to step in to set... Oh, sorry, that's actually a macro, I guess. So you'll notice the one thing that's missing from this, and I said this before, you can't look at disassembly. That's the big thing I would... probably the reason I couldn't switch this right now would be that. So we can't do that. Otherwise, I'm like doing some hover stuff here, and it's working pretty well. It looks like in terms of hovering over stuff, if I hover over a variable, it does show me what it actually is. That's pretty great. Let's take a look at query performance counter here. I'm sorry, performance frequency. You can see it kind of outputting there. So let me take a look at that. So that got, oops, I typed that wrong. Okay. So here's the perf count frequency result. I'm going to open it up. I don't really know what that is. That looks like that might be some kind of a bug. I don't think there's really any particular reason why there should be an uninspectable variable there. So that may just be a PDB parsing error or something that they don't quite parse yet. So I really couldn't tell you. This looks probably correct otherwise. Let's go ahead and step in here. Step in seems to work just fine. Here's Win32 build exe path file name. Let's take a look at the state. That looks totally... and by the way, I'd just like to emphasize, you can't really feel this because you're watching on stream, but this is so much snappier than Visual Studio. Like, already this one person, Nick Slivka, I believe is his name, who wrote this, has bested the entire Visual Studio team, which is dozens of people over decades, has completely trounced them in terms of actually writing a program that inspects their own format, right? And so excellent work here. I mean, this feels great. It's like way better than Visual Studio already. Way better than Visual Studio. And that's a product that they charge thousands of dollars for, right? All right. So let's step into cat strings. Let's try just stepping through some things here. Again, everything looks like it's working really well. I'm having no trouble using it. It's updating. It updates instantaneously. I mean, just again, so much better. Look at that. I mean, this is really quality work here. I mean, this is great. If I had money, I would just hire this person, right? John, are you out there listening? Hey, John, you want a debugger for JAI? Well, hire Nick. All right, so anyway, this looks great. Let me try stepping out. That's harder. So I don't know how to step out. Maybe there is no step out. I tried hitting Shift F11 and it doesn't do anything. So that key, either there is no step out of, or it's not bound to that. Now, I don't know how to use the console, but it did tell us how to list those keys. So I'm just gonna go use that and see if I can figure out where step out of might be if there is something, which there might not be, right? So I'm looking here, there's like a step into, step over. There is no step out of that I can see. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that that feature isn't implemented yet. That'd be a good one to implement. Out of the things that's missing, that'd probably be a big one for me. Step out of. Step out of, and again, disassembly. Only two things I've noticed so far that I really would... that I would really be missing. So let's try and set a breakpoint. I don't know how to set a breakpoint in this program. Control B looks like it switches buffers to look at things, so that's probably not super helpful. I want to set a breakpoint by name. I don't know how to do that, or even if it can do that, so let's just again take a look. We've got, let's see. So I don't know. Let me see. Is there a tab complete? Is there like a breakpoint command or anything? There's a data break. So this I'm not sure. This one it may support, and I just don't necessarily know how to do it, is the thing. So I really couldn't say. It's got a data break menu, which is awesome, by the way. But we don't really need that at the moment. That's good. All this stuff is good. So yeah, I just can't figure out how I'd set a breakpoint by name. It might not have that functionality yet. I don't know. Again, just really hard to say because we didn't make this thing. Let's see. I like the phrase pluck and select and pluck. I don't know what they do, but I like them. Yeah, so I guess, like I said, don't really know what to do about that. Not sure how to set a breakpoint on that. Now, if I was at a particular line, it's pretty clear that I can just set the breakpoint however I want. So the only reason I care about the type of breakpoint that I was talking about is just that you've seen me on Handmade Hero. A lot of times I'll do that. I want to be able to set a breakpoint on a function because it's just an easier way to do it than having to find it. Right? So I really want a good way to quickly sort of set the breakpoint in that way. So yeah, I just don't know. And I can't really look up any buffers that haven't been loaded yet probably, right? I mean, I could go open the file, I suppose, and look at it. But that's really, yeah, so that's really the biggest problem. Now let's take a look at some of the advanced features here because I feel like I read some stuff in the README. Let me just go ahead and... I feel like there's a thing that was pretty interesting. You could, like, apparently just view, like, images and stuff even. So let's take a look at some of that. So let's see. There's... Here we go. So these features, like in particular, this one is one of the smartest features I think I've seen in the debugger. I don't know who came up with that. Maybe it's in Visual Studio and I just don't know how to do it. But I love that. Basically what you can say is, hey, I've got a linked list. I want to see the linked list clearly. So here is how many to go and here's the field that contains the next pointer. That's just great. There are so many times when I would like that, right? Again, just really, really good. Oh, here it is. F-break. Places a breakpoint, start a specified function. So it does have it. Basically, I would just say F-break and which function I want to go into. So, for example, let's suppose that I want to stop at, I have to imagine a debugging scenario here. What might we want to break at? I don't know. Maybe something with a linked list. So let's look at Handmade asset here. Let's try acquire asset memory, right? So, oops, I don't know how to actually tell it to keep going. Maybe I just hit F5. Looks like maybe. There it is. All right. So that's pretty cool. I need to set our executable path properly in order for us to be able to run and ever get to that function. So let's go ahead and say Handmade. That's the startup. Oops, I guess you have to do that. Why is that an invalid path? Oh, I see. Because it didn't populate. I'm sorry. I edited the wrong thing. My bad. Let's do that again. Build. Win32 Handmade, and then this is what I'm supposed to edit. Handmade. There we go. Okay, so now what I want to do is run it and see if we get to that thing. I don't know how to list breakpoints, so I don't know what breakpoints are actively there, right? The way they do that in Visual Studio is I've got a little window that lists the breakpoints. I don't know if you can get one of those in here. In terms of the view, I'm not sure what exactly we have for options. In that to that effect. there's like a bunch of stuff here like call stack and so on. I don't know, like if I hit Alt 0, there's the debug output. You can see I can sort of select the different, which by the way is great. The hotkeys to move to these windows is awesome. I would learn those and start using them. So I don't know if I can view the breakpoints. It might be here that I could do like a list command or something that would show me all my breakpoints. I don't know how to see all of the things that I can do either. So that's a little bit confusing. Maybe this is all of them. Oops, sorry. Maybe this is all of them. I don't know. That's pretty cool. Right. So, all right. So let me step in. Yeah, that's really cool. This thing is really impressive. I mean, this is a very, very good project here. I'm impressed with this. So there's my answer, right? It looks like maybe this isn't quite working. It says that this breakpoint is inactive, but I'm not sure why, because it's on a function. So there may be something in here that needs to get fixed, which is that breakpoints on functions need to remain on functions. Let me just see what happens if I do fbreak and paste again, acquire asset memory. And now I do one on here. It seems like, I don't know, it seems like this may be a little bit broken. I'm not sure. Because it's like, it worked, right? So it is setting it here, but the listing isn't right. But again, pretty minor because it worked. So stepping through here, this is great. I mean, it looks like it's totally working. I can look at everything. Yeah, I mean, it's really great. Let's try some of the advanced features now. So we know here, for example, this block has a next pointer, right? And so when we go ahead and insert this block, we should give us an opportunity here to look at that linked list. So taking a look at the linked list here, we can say like, okay, here's the block, and here's the next pointer for the block that's pointing to something else. Let's say that we want to look at several of these. This is, again, something that I'm going to try and learn here. I don't know how to do this. It says LTA will list a linked list set for me. So let's go ahead and give it a pointer to the first thing, which would be block in this case. Next is the fields. I don't know if I need to quote that. I probably do, so it's probably something more like that. And then we've got a number to traverse, which is going to be, let's say, 5. So I don't know if this actually will work. We'll see if it does or if it doesn't work on the way down. So here we go. Here's the first block. It's 21 CDEC, right? And it's got A8 at the end. There it is right there. So this is the first one. You can see that the pointers for it are, let's see here, are what they should be, right? Then we can look at the next one down, and that would be under here. Oops. Sorry, that would be, where would that be? I'm confusing my own self here. So there's the first one. There's the next one, right? Under blocks, that's 0, 0. That's this. Here's the next one. It's 1, 10, 48. Yeah. So again, just to underscore how awesome this is, you saw how confusing it was for me to even try to verify it, but this is so clean, right? Now you can just see the array, the linked list as if it was just a list of items. Exactly what you want, right? So good, right? Just so good. Really great work there. I mean, that's just fantastic, right? I mean, absolutely fantastic. Let's try another advanced feature. I'm going to go ahead here and say, let's run to finalize asset bitmap. So I set a breakpoint there. I'm going to turn off this breakpoint. When we get here, now we've got a texture op. That texture op has an image in it. You can actually see the texture here. It's 512 by 512, and it's got a data pointer to it. Let's see if we can actually inspect it. Here is the image call. So I'm going to go ahead and say image. And again, this is something that in order to do in Visual Studio, you need to install a plugin, right? So let's go ahead and look at image. I'm going to say op.texture.data, which is a big ask here. Like, we're asking to do so much stuff. We're asking to like dereference this whole thing and all this stuff. So I'm going to try it first this way, and if it doesn't work, I'll put in things explicitly. So we're giving it the maximal challenge here, if you will. So we need the num channels. Actually, we know that. That's always 4. We don't need to pass that. But now we need the width and the height. So that's update texture width update texture height. And again, this may be too much to ask. We'll see. So let's find out. Unbelievable. Look at that. This is just, I mean, this is just brilliant. This is just great. That's that's just awesome. Now, I don't know what that actually does in terms of launching. That I'm going to leave this preview open. And what I'm going to do here, I don't know, is that like a... Okay, so I click preview and it previews it. If I hit F5 to run, we're at a different one now. And I don't know if I can still preview it. I can. That's just, I mean, this is just phenomenal. I mean, that's just really, really good. So here's what I would say. It needs a breakpoint list. I would like to be able to hit F9 to toggle breakpoints. I'd like a breakpoint list somewhere. Maybe the console's fine, but it would just have to work. And I'd like disassembly. Barring that, I'd switch. If it had those things, I would switch already. I mean, this is way better than Visual Studio, way better than Visual Studio, faster than Visual Studio, launches immediately. It's got features without having to install plugins that Visual Studio just doesn't even have out of the box. I mean, it's just better. It's just better. So, yeah. Disassembly in a register window to solve that side of things. Breakpoints, maybe some hotkey changes, and this thing is a drop-in replacement. I mean, excellent work. Just excellent work across the board. I would pay several $100s for that product, by the way. We would definitely license it, and that's what I would use. So, all right. So let's try CodeClap. I think CodeClap's going to be a little harder because, again, like I said, the interface was pretty challenging, but it had a lot of features as well. Looked like it had more features than Visual Studio as well, so we'll try it. But I can't promise I'll get as far as in CDBG because, again, the interface is kind of tricky. So I feel like it's one of those things that the devs probably need to work on the interface or at least provide some pretty significant documentation as to how to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and run it here. I'm going to try to run it the same way I ran the other one. But again, I don't know if it supports that usage necessarily. So here's CodeClap launching. I'm launching it on my Handmade executable. We haven't set the working directory, so we need to figure out a way to do that because that will be wrong. Just like it was in CDBG, we had to change it, right? So as you can see, there's a little bit that's the same. So it's got, two windows over here that kind of feel a little bit similar, but otherwise it's kind of bizarre. Like, even just this right here, I can sort of see what it is. It's a resizer, but a lot of the stuff is kind of non-standard. Like, I don't know what a lot of this stuff would necessarily do. I guess that closes it, maybe. Okay, so that's like keybind, like this is like settings. You're right, it's pretty non-standard, so it's going to take us a little bit to get into, right? But we'll try to work around it. So let's see. So also the stepping is different. So F8 steps a line and F9 steps into, F7 steps out of. All right, so working through here. So I'll tell you right off the bat, really nice feature is this display. You can see what they're doing here. They're just showing you the values of things as you move through. So it's pretty great because, that saves me the trouble of having to add things or look at a window. It's just showing right in there what the thing is. That's a great feature, right? I mean, why not do that? You know what I mean? There's no reason not to just show me what the values are. You've got room, so do it, right? That's Brilliant. Really, really nice. What'd I do? All right, there we go. Yeah, so that's really nice. Let's try stepping into something. Step into is F9. So seemed like it worked flawlessly there. It looks like an output window has been created for us. I kind of like that translucent thing. That's pretty cool, actually. I don't know what it's telling me, though. That's not something we output. I don't think we ever print child created, do we? So I assume that's a actual output from the debugger telling us that a child thread, because like that is something that would potentially happen in the X-input library, for example. I don't really know, though. So stepping through again here, we're looking at the X input. So let's take a look at, can I inspect something? Let's look at X input get state. I love the fact that it's got command completion there, right? Did you see that? How that's doing that? Now X input get state, unfortunately, is not in the completion. So it would be nice if it actually was able to complete things that were in the scope. It doesn't look like it is, unfortunately, but you know, that's what I wanted to do. It's saying that X input get state is undefined, but it is defined, so I'm not sure what's going on there exactly. I don't think that's a pound define, but maybe it is. So I don't know. I can't seem to get it to show that. We know X input library, since it's defined right there, is obviously a real variable. And it found that. So I don't know why X input get state wasn't able to be expanded. It may be a macro, is the only thing I can think of. And so if it is a macro, then that's just, yeah, like something that, you know, most debuggers can't handle that. So it's no big deal, right? All right. So step line is what? F8 here. Let's try to keep doing that. So one thing that I will say is, like, it doesn't, step line doesn't seem to quite be working right. Like, I have to hit it a lot of times. It doesn't seem to actually be able to step a line. Also, like this, like I can't seem to scroll properly. Not really sure what's going on there. This might just be slowness. Can't quite tell. Yeah, so I think it's just gotten itself into a state where it's really struggling with something. I'm not sure what. So you can see here it's pegged CPU usage wise, right? That's a full peg on some core, basically. But I'm not sure what's wrong. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's just kind of a little bit busted. If I try to stop the program completely, see if it can recover. It can't really seem to. Yeah, so I guess what I would say here is, again, like, it doesn't quite seem to be at the point in terms of usability that CDBG is. It's like not really able to reliably debug a program, right? Maybe in terms of user interface, I don't know. It seems like it's got some nice features, kind of like CDBG is looking beyond what the basic things are that happen in Visual Studio. Like putting all the things into the program to look at was really pretty cool. But again, the usability is just not there yet. So I feel like that's what needs the work on CodeClap. I think CodeClap does support disassembly. So when it is working, it's pretty easy, I think, to get more features out of it. I'm not sure, again, because it is a little bit non-standard, it's hard to know like how to get to various things that you might want to do. Let me see if there's anything in here. I thought it had disassembly, but I don't know how to access it. There it is. So this little drop down here says I can look at the various kinds. All right, so it looks like, yeah, it looks like mixed isn't really working at the moment. So again, I think that one, it just needs reliability, testing, polish, get it to the point where it doesn't crash, doesn't slow down, right? It's really, that is step one. But it looks, again, looks promising, like it seems like it sort of is on the way. CDBG definitely way further along right now, I would say, in terms of usability. I can see myself switching to CDBG probably pretty soon, depending on the situation. So there you have it. Both of those projects seem pretty promising. Again, I wish I had some way to provide significant funding to them. Like I said, CDBG, I feel like I would buy for a significant amount of money right now, actually, if it just had a couple things. Disassembly, reliable breakpoint list, maybe the ability to rebind some of the keys or add a few keys that make it functionally identical to the things like Click and Visual Studio. That's a couple $100 product for me easily. I would buy that tomorrow. I can't speak for other people, but again, very nice work. So pretty optimistic that those look like products that are going, right? Those are going, and hopefully they will come to fruition, both of them. We need more debuggers. That's all I can say. So anyway, thank you very much to both teams for sending me those and letting me play around with them. I wish you both the best of luck, and I hope that you're able to finish those projects or at least get them to a version state where they can be used, because I am really looking forward to being able to use one or both of them in the future instead of Visual Studio. That said, let's go ahead and move on to actually debugging here. And also for CodeClap, if you want me to try that one again, since like I said, it looks like it was kind of on the edge of, it just needs some polish to get over that. I'm happy to try that again once things are more stabilized, because it looked like, I mean, it looked pretty full featured, right? So if it just gets cleaned up, it looked like it had most of the features we wanted, like the mixed assembly and so on. So feel free to ping me again when it's ready to go, and I'll give it another shot. Obviously same with CDBG, but I think, like I said, that one's pretty close. I think all you'd really have to do is tell me disassembly was in there, and I'd just switch already. And that's it. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move those guys out for now. We will keep a watch on them and hopefully be able to switch to one of them someday. Let's go back to programming, the game we was programming. And if I remember correctly, we were probably at a point where we should think about fixing the graphics on our characters. Because like right now, we're still using ancient art assets, right? Like ones that don't even match the perspective. So we should probably try to start doing some stuff there. I don't even know. This is gonna, like, we're really soon getting into the part where it's gameplay programming. I know John Blow is too busy watching Counter-Strike today, and stream sniping us. But if he's listening out there, you know, like, this is really your problem, dude. He's the game designer. I'm not a game designer, so he should really have to come on the stream and design the game. But you know, if wishes were horses, everyone would have a stable. So anyway, we pretty much did what we wanted to do, and we can put art assets in the game now pretty easily, and did. We want to work on our lighting, obviously, but we don't really need to do that right now. Let's go ahead and just try to get a little further down the art asset road, just because, you know, I want to shake that system out. And I would like to figure out, you know, essentially how we're going to do all of those other little entity placement things and so on. So what I'd like to do here is let's just try and replace the heroes art assets. This is going to be a little bit annoying because we kind of have some code in there for like warping the assets around. Those were based on a fully upright drawing character. We have a more top-down drawing character now, so it's not really going to apply. But we can do some basic things like change the head. And that's a pretty straightforward thing. And we can also do things like put the gloves in properly and a lot of other stuff. So we can actually start something like that. We can also populate the world with some more characters now. And so we should just do those things. The other thing it would be nice to do soon is you can see there's a bug with the fog and alpha. It's not alphaing fog properly. You might not be able to see that, but there's like cruft in here. You see that? Those are mild alpha pixels, just things the artist didn't clean up. This is Youngshin's just prototype artwork, so it was not cleaned up or anything. And normally you wouldn't be able to see that. So if I switch to a mode where there's no fog, you'll notice you don't see it. The reason for that is when fog is not enabled, we don't have the pre-multiplied alpha mismatch. So basically what we've got is we've got a bug in the shader that's making fog turn our alpha wrong. So again, just part of this process of just getting the game looking right and making the world look like something you might want to explore is just going to be, cleaning up all these little bits, right? So let's go ahead and think a little bit harder about what we're doing here. I'm going to go ahead and look in that art directory that we've got. So here's all the stuff. We know we've got block, walls, and floors. We named those properly, and they are imported. Here is a very long list of characters we've got. We have a template here. I'm going to rename the way we do templates so that they get ignored. Right now, we kind of want it to look more like this. So here is the template for a character. Here is the template for an item. And we want those to get ignored by the system, so I'm intentionally not prefixing them with a recognized prefix, right? So the template character and template item are two things that we know we will never read, but they're here just to remind us of how they're laid out, right? And then we've got, I don't think, any other template-specific things. All the rest of the templates are implicit and things that we can figure out on our own. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have for characters. So what you can see here is, and of course, it's all busted because Microsoft doesn't know how to write a picture viewer. But what you can see here is we have various characters. Here's a cat. 3 cats, actually. Fred, Hannah, and I think Molly is in here too, yeah. There's Molly. So we've got 3 cats. Like everything else in the game, there's a body and a head. And you can kind of see that all of the characters are structured the same way. And you can see in the template for the character, they've got default dodge, move, hit, attack, and so on. That can be filled in here. And they've got some facial expressions too. And you can see like the hero, for example, has some. Other people don't. And there's nothing in those, right? And that's allowed because we don't want to force the artist to make too many art assets. So we don't want them to have to fill in this grid. We want them to just fill in the parts of the grid they care about. And that's what Anna's done here. So for example, most simple NPCs don't have things like expressions, but maybe the hero does, right? And maybe some of these other characters will get expressions at some time. And you can see them all here separated out the way that they should be. I'd like to put these characters in the game now. But in order to do that, we need to think about how they're going to be tagged. So, one aspect of the tagging list for almost everybody but the hero, we know only this part's filled in because they're basic. They don't have much extra stuff. So the grid addition of tags is actually pretty easy. And the reason it is, even if they were filled out, is because the grid tags are actually all defined by the grid itself. We know that the tag hit will apply to everything in this column, that the tag for facing direction will apply to everything in this column, body and head tag will apply to everything in these sections. So the tags for what these art assets define can actually just be read off of the grid itself, and I don't think that's going to be much of a problem. The problem is going to be here. So in here we sort of have a collection of things that are all somewhat interchangeable in terms of characters. All of these orphans can be interchangeable in terms of their art assets. For example, you could trivially put the head of this character on the body for this character if you wanted to, and so on. So what we're really talking about here is ways of tagging these characters with tags that we would use to identify them. And there's multiple ways that we could do that, right? One way is to just tag them with their name, but another is to tag them with their sort of attributes. You know, for example, if this one was tagged with a sports attribute, for example, like and, you know, can't really, there we go. You know, things like that. I don't know to what extent we really want to go down that route because I don't know how much we're going to want to interchange them. But it's like, it's just worth noting, right? So the heads themselves, yeah, I don't know. I really just don't know how we want to categorize them exactly. Some of them are obvious. I mean, this is obviously for baking, right? And this is a tailor. But the heads, I mean, you know, they're just faces. So there's no real way to tag faces in a way that the game would care about what the face is. So that's really tough. And that's the part that I'm not really sure about. I'm not sure what to do there. And this has nothing to do with programming, right? This is just how we want our game to talk about these various components that can be put together. I'm just gonna go ahead and do like, yeah, like, just trying to think. I mean, what we could do is tag the heads with the names of the characters, but the bodies with not with that. And I guess the other question is, do we ever actually use the bodies for other person? I mean, you know what? I guess for now, we could just name the characters and tag them both. I really wish I had a solid idea about which one I wanted to do. But I just don't. So on these, in terms of like the enemies, they're a lot more straightforward because they probably have elements that we would actually care about. Like, for example, you know, a mummy is maybe undead and skeletal, you know, things like that. And a skeleton is, you know, undead. These sorts of things we could probably just codify, which we sort of did, like skeleton and dark, skeleton broken, and just regular skeleton, right? And a mummy is also a skeleton, so I guess here's how I'd say it. So let's start with the easy ones. I'm gonna talk about character dead. And a mummy sort of has skin. So I would say it's dead with skin. This is dead without skin, maybe. This is dead and broken. This is dead and dark, right? So we would have, you know, a dead character, a dead broken character, a dead dark character, and a dead one that actually has skin. So, right, because you can sort of see, or I guess we could call it wrap. or wrapped, something like that. So tagging out that one is pretty easy, and it's really these that are harder. So we have like cat here, and we have a couple of those that we can tag as cats. And then how we want to describe the cats is a little bit different. So Fred is a tabby but is brown. Molly is a tabby but is gray. And Hannah is a Burman. And a ghost, because unfortunately Hannah died, which is sad. I wish she had not died, but she is only a ghost now, unfortunately. So Hannah is actually a ghost and a Burman. Fred is a cat who is brown tabby, and Molly is a gray tabby. So those are propertyized here. I don't know if these would be considered ghosts. I don't think they would. They're sort of like, and you know, maybe dead is the wrong word. Maybe here like undead is the correct word, right? Because dead sort of implies that they're not going to move around, whereas undead probably is better. Okay, so we've got those in there. We've got cats. We've got undead. So that's all the characters that are clear and easy to name. Krampus, and so so the rest of these, I guess what I would say is Krampus and the orphans and the hero. Krampus and the hero are probably somewhat specific. Honestly, the hero and the orphans really probably aren't, because you know you probably want to be able to play as the other orphans at some point. So I think this might just more be like Orphan 00, right? So these are all the different orphan body parts, and the question is just how do we name these? Because they're really not necessarily all that descript, you know? And especially because the heads and the bodies, you know, it may have been a mistake to put those in the same file, because the heads are just heads. They're not really very specific. I mean, you could say one has, you know, brown hair or black hair or red hair or something, but yeah, it's not really like important, you know? It doesn't, it's just the face, you would recognize it. Whereas the bodies are a little bit more specific, like, you know, this one's wearing a sports jersey and this one's wearing a dress, or a skirt rather, and this one's wearing a bandana, and so you could kind of think of those, and this one's wearing an apron. You could kind of think of those as being important tags that go with the body, and the head just doesn't really have that, you know? So I do wonder if maybe what we want to do sort of longer term is just put those in separate files that would have separate tags. And I really couldn't tell you, but that seems like what we want to do. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to tag the bodies. I'm going to ignore the heads. So the heads will just get the tags that the bodies have, and then maybe we'll talk to Anna and just say, look, let's change how we're doing this. Let's go ahead and split them out into separate files that don't have that property, right? And then the heads can just be named probably, because I don't think there's really going to be a lot of other ways you can, you know, really talk about a head in a gameplay sense. I mean, even things like hair color, skin color, eye color, the game doesn't care. They wouldn't affect the gameplay in any way. So unless there was something about the head, like with the NPCs, this is an undead character versus a dark undead character. Those are gameplay related. The characters don't have that. Their head could just be whatever it is. And that's just sort of the identity of the character, in the sense that, like, oh, that's Lisa from the orphanage versus Carl from the orphanage. is the only real way that the head would come into play, which makes me think that the head is just specific, right? The head is just going to be named something, and like there'll be an instance of Lisa in the orphanage, and that's her head. But the body you could be a little freer with, because since it is representational, you could say that, you know, if someone puts an apron on, they get the apron body. I don't know, right? So that's, you know, again, it's really hard to say, and maybe the answer is you don't really ever want to switch it. Maybe, like, you know, if this is Lisa and that's her body and head, maybe the only time they ever appear together is with her, and you can never swap out or anything, right? And I don't know. So I think the bodies need to be revisited. Also, you know, we've kind of got two sort of bodies. There's stouter bodies and more slender bodies. You could really think of those as just two types of body and then having different outfits on them, right? And so I would rather categorize it that way. I think that would just be a more sensible way to do it. Because then again, you could sort of have like the concept of changing the outfits. So just looking at it, I think that's a better way to go. And I think we should probably make that change. Looking at the cats, on the other hand, cats don't work that way. Cats, you can't really swap. You can't put a tabby head on a Berman body. It doesn't work that way. So they're a little more sensible because the bodies are not clothed, so they are like naturally going to go with the head in a very specific way. So that's a little bit more specific. So what I may do for now is say, let's go ahead and maybe have these art assets get changed out before we start playing with them. And we'll replace them with other ones. And yeah, and maybe we can, yeah. I mean, I think that's what I'd rather do. So what I think I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a new folder temporarily. And I'm going to call this pending. And I'm just going to shunt all of the orphan stuff into there. And we're just going to concentrate just on this part, right? And so here we know that we've got Krampus. And Krampus is pretty specific. I think Krampus is just Krampus. And there's probably not going to ever be another Krampus. So I think character Krampus is pretty much it. I don't think we need to specify anything more. It's just Krampus. Krampus default. And that should do it. We're not going to look at the rest of these right now. We're just going to look at these. So this should at least allow us to put cats in the orphanage. It should allow us to put Krampus in there. And we could even have some monsters, right? Because those are in there. So let's start by just implementing that, because that's what we can implement. And then I think we might change this out a little bit. Again, you know, maybe, I guess the other thing we could do is put a pause on all of these and have them all get separated out. But I don't think we want to do that. So I think what we want to do is maybe, yeah. Am I overcomplicating? Like, that's the other thing is, like, I don't know, maybe we should just keep all the characters together and you know, they are named what they're named, and we don't really put much more on it than that. And then we could just proceed as given, and you just have characters just all, you know, go in the same files. I really just don't know. It just really kind of feels to me like the heads want to be different. So I'm gonna stick with that. I'm just gonna say that's what that is. Because these are all based on properties, and the other ones just really aren't. And so I feel like we want to try to stick to that as best we can, and go from there. All right, so let's go ahead and define the tags that we're talking about so that these can be imported into the system and we can start using them. So we've got in the asset import system, I think right now we sort of have character stubbed out. So you can see that, like, hands, for example, do get imported Characters do not, right? And so what we want to do is we want to set up this exact same thing for characters, but we gotta change the way that this stuff is set up pretty dramatically here, because we've got a lot more tags we have to apply. We have to apply tags based on both the column and the row. So we need a way of looking at both of those things together. So let's start by looking at the character template sheet. So here it is. And what you can see here is that going down, we've got the facing directions working exactly as they did with the hands, but it happens twice, right? So really, instead of y-index less than 4, what we want to do is everywhere in the y-index at all, we want to add that tag, right? And so we want to sort of look at the tags this way. And say, first of all, no matter what happens, you're going to get a facing direction tag. It's going to be the y-index times tau over 4, but this is actually going to wrap now. So it's really going to be mod 4. So basically, we do for each one of the ones that we're looking at, we get a facing direction in there, and it gets specified that way. Now, one thing that's sort of important to remember here is that this goes in the direction of the file. We don't flip the file, we flip the tiles. So even though the PNG goes down but graphics goes up for us, we're still going down here, which means that this is the 0, 0 tile, which is kind of nice because it makes it easier to think about here. So here's where we add the facing direction. Now what we need to do is add body for anything in this here and head for everything up in here. And then we just need to do these, okay? So the first thing I want to do is I want to bifurcate this. We've got an if y-index is less than 4 here, and an if y-index is greater than 4. And that's exactly what we want. So we need in here to be able to specify whether something is a head or a body. If it's less than 4, it's a body. If it's greater than 4, it's a head. And we don't have any real percentages here. They're just either are or aren't, right? So it's pretty straightforward. We can just say, look, that's what this is, and that's, you know, all there is to it, right? So the next thing we need to do after that is start to talk about the specific tags that we want for each of these. So then what we need to do is say, well, okay, if we're inside y-index less than 4, then we're talking about a body, which means this is what we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So what we want to do here is do a switch on the x-index. And we probably want this switch, again, to be part of the specifics. So in here, we probably want to do this, where we say, all right, always add that tag, and then add maybe some other tags. So here I want to say if we're in case 0, which is to say the first one, we're going to add a tag of some kind here, which is tag whatever, and off we go. And we want to do a break at the end, right? So this just allows us to put a little cracker in there that basically says, look at which column you're in, and we're going to apply various tags that are just based on our knowledge of what the template type is that this person said the file was. There's a default template for 0, which means that I think we want to just call that an idle. So if you're looking for idle, that's what's in this row. If you're looking for dodge left, it's here. If you're looking at dodge right, it's here. Then we've got move. Then we've got hit, attack, and nothing in the final one, right? So this is just a like to be determined. So anything that comes in there really shouldn't have anything. What that means is I think we want to just not have that occur, meaning we don't want to set any tags in there. We want to leave those unset. So I would say actually here, in fact, how did we do that beforehand? Yeah, we just only set them for those. So what I'd like to do here is just say, look, even just around this whole thing, we want to prevent that. What we could do is prevent it here by just saying, look, we only want to go up to number 7, right? Or a better way to say that might be less than or equal to 6, because that's the only cases we actually have, right? And the rest of them shouldn't add a tag. Could do that. I think it's a little bit more compelling to do this because since we have different numbers of acceptable ones depending on which template you're in, I think what I want to do is something a little bit more specific here, which is maybe to say, look, let's actually start this stuff a little bit more specifically, where we begin and end inside these so that we can actually tag these like so, only if they actually exist, right? Only if there are things that exist in the template. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those, right? So it should be like that. Another way to write it like that, it should be less than 7 of them, right? I used to say there should be less than 8 of them, which is less than 7. That's so hard. Okay, write it like that, right? And in here we have even less. So in here you're actually not allowed to get past the third one, right? So it's got to be less than or equal to 2 as an index. And the switch statement is correspondingly simpler, right? So in here I can say, well, want to do a switch case there, default, surprise, anger. Something like that, right? So now when we import one of these, they'll all get tagged properly and they'll get shoved into the thing. What they won't have is anything from the file name. And we need them to have something from the file name because otherwise they won't be able to be differentiated. So when we actually go to parse these, we need to add to our kind of global tag table. Now we also need to, we can tell right here that we need to add the tag, all these tags need to be set up in our asset tag system. That's inside file format.h. So we need to add tags here for each of those things. So we've got a tag, wait a minute, how does this work? So we've got basic category here. And I guess basic category for head and body. I guess we never crossed that basic category. So those are not really appropriate tags in that sense. They should just be basic category. So let's go ahead and fix that. So in here, like those are all legitimate tags and those are all legitimate tags. These are not legitimate tags. So what we really want to do here is say this is an asset body, don't need to add a tag. And here we want to say this is an asset head. Now we don't have any more specificity there. We don't, for example, have asset torso or cape and these sorts of things. So I'm going to change this to be body, and head are the two that we'll use, and cape will go away eventually as we start to clean those up, right? So really what we need are these here to be added to the tag set. Let's go ahead and do that. We've got an idle, we've got a dodge left, we've got a dodge right, we've got a move, we have a hit, we have an attack, and so on. Idle, oops, surprise, and anger, right? So we've got all those tags, and now we should be able to compile this properly. Again, we have to change anywhere that was using torso should now be doing body, right? And that's fine. All right. Oops. There we go. And so we've added all those tags, and then we need to update our tag table. Again, because C and C++ don't support introspection. Why would they? They've only had 30 years to add that feature. You can't expect miracles. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we define them to be in here and copy them in. There we go. And so here we just have all of these different tags. So here's idle, Here's dodge left. Oops. Dodge right. Move, hit, attack 1, attack 2, surprise, anger, and then we're going to need to add even more tags here in a second. By the way, in case you haven't noticed, you can see how many tags we're adding. This is why I was saying we need to deal with tags sparsely. It's a requirement because we're going to have 100 tags by the time this game is done. And so that thing we're doing now with the matching, not going to cut it. I said that before, and I'm not lying. The tag matching is going to have to be much better, but that's not that hard to do. We'll be able to do it. So now we have to look through here and add all of these. So we have, cat. We've got Berman. We've got Ghost. We've got Tabby and Brown. We've got Gray. We've got Krampus. Undead. Broken. And so one of these thing is bones here, right? The way that we were doing hand bones, so I feel like these should probably have bones in them. And furthermore, I feel like this should probably be undead. Something like that. All right. So anyway, continuing on that trend, we've got undead, we've got broken. We already have dark and dark energy there. We've got wrapped. And I think that's all of them. So there's Cat, Berman, Ghost, Tabby, Brown, Gray, Krampus, Undead, Broken, and Wrapped. All of this extra meaningless typing brought to you by the C++ Standards Committee, because if there's one thing they love more than anything in the world, it's making programmers type a bunch of useless garbage. So here we are, manually copying. None of which would have been necessary in JAI or any other language for that matter. And build. So that's our tag importing. We should now be able to import those characters in. I don't actually know that I'm right about that, but let's just go ahead and run it anyway. Here's me running the import process, and that should just import them into our local HHA file and be done with it, right? Okay. So that looks like our multi-tile import's a little bit buggy to me, to say the least. I also like the fact that we're getting a cat body and head right now. That's awesome. But I'd like to go ahead and debug our multi-tile import because it looks like you can see that it's got a weird like split happening with the way that the textures are lined up there. And so I'd like to go ahead and find out what's going on there because I don't really know what's happening there. We have a number of things we have to address to get this stuff working properly. One is we have to debug the multi-tile import because it looks like it's importing the stride wrong. But the other thing that we have to do that we didn't have to do for the environment importing is we need to be able to set like the alignment on the sprites. Remember, we got an align point to figure out where we're gonna like place sprites when we place them in the world. We're gonna have to do something for that, because right now we don't have that. Right now it just gets set to a default and there's no way to change it. And obviously we can't put in the PNG because Photoshop doesn't really provide a way for artists to do that in any way that artists understand. There are actually some ways you could like add text to a PNG in Photoshop and stuff like that, but we don't really want artists to have to figure that out. It's done very poorly. Again, Photoshop, Adobe and the C++ Standards Committee would love each other. They're basically like people who seem to completely ignore the needs of the people who actually use the products, their products. They should have like some kind of a like aggressively we don't want you to use our stuff conference that they go to each year to talk about new ways they can ignore obvious things that everyone has to work around in their products. All right, so let's go ahead and work on debugging that. Because we probably are fine for the rest of our stuff. Let's double check that the rest of the tagging and that stuff went okay. I suspect it probably did, but it never hurts to be careful. So I'm going to go ahead and use HHA edit, and remember we've got a dump thing here. I can take local HHA and export it to a text file. That allows us to use, for example, tab view, which I have to actually pull out of the bonus pack here, tab view, and use it on local.txt. So that lets me just see in here what the tags are for all the assets. So what I could do is look at all the stuff that's in here. Obviously we have all our Flora stuff. Then here's like a bunch of hand stuff that got imported. Here's the character stuff that got imported. So for example, the Berman Ghost Cat here, we can take a look at here. It's Cat Berman Ghost. It's an idle. I mean, looks exactly like what we want. So, you know, like I said, I think it worked just fine. Let's look at the gray tabby. Cat gray tabby. So, you know, looks like the import's working just fine. You know, Krampus is Krampus. And that's just true in general. So I feel like this is probably fine. So our problem is just that when we do these imports here, we know that our normal path that imports just a block seems to be working properly because we haven't had any trouble importing those in. But our sort of newly modified version that does the multi-tile, because remember we had multi-tile working, but we modified a little bit. It looks like it doesn't get the stride right necessarily. And so what we'd like to do is go look at what's happening there. Like, why is that erroring out? And in what cases is it erroring out? Because it looks like there's some funny business going on there. So I'm going to go ahead and just inspect that code path. I'm also going to take a look at it in the debugger. I'm going to delete the local.hha because I want to force a complete re-export. So I'm going to do a create for a new local HHA, which means now I can just force it to re-export everything into that file from the source materials. That'll allow us to debug the export that already happened, or should say the import that already happened, which is what we want to do. I'm going to go to the build here and switch to debug mode so I can step through it. I'm also going to take a brief look to refamiliarize ourselves with exactly what's happening in that code path, make sure that there's nothing obviously wrong before I start debugging it and looking at it in more detail. Now, the part that's failing specifically is process multi-tile import right here. This part is working properly as far as we know. Single tile import has not seen any particular errors. So we're really talking about this right here. You can see here when we start down it, what we do is we take the tile dimensions that we're told to use, which is the 1024 tile, and we specify the size for the test there. What we are doing here is saying, look, if we took a tile dimension of 1024, how far should we scale it down? And we get a downsample count there. That's just so we scale all the sprites uniformly, because we are going to pick out a region of the sprite based on how much is used. We don't want the amount we scale it down to be based on that actual size of the used portion of the rectangle. And the reason that we don't want to do that is because if we were to do that, we would scale some things down and some things not inside the same sprite, which would lead to weird sizing artifacts. So we really don't want to go that way. So the downsample count has to be based on the general size of things. That's what that's doing, and we save that for use later. We come through here and say, look, here's how many X and Y tiles there can be at maximum based on the tag information we were passed in. We're not going to look beyond that. So then here we look to make sure that the size of the file itself isn't larger than the maximum number of contemplated rows in our system, and we output errors in that case. We need to at some point actually print these errors. That would be nice. We haven't done that yet. That's something that we probably should put on our to-do list. We then loop through the tiles looking for pixels in any of them. When we find pixels in them, we sort of remember the bounding box that was used. You can see us picking out a min, max for Y and X there. All right. And what we want to do here is say, okay, if we actually found anything, in which case we're going to need at least some dimension here. If we found something, then we can proceed. What we do here is we first look to see whether the minimum is sufficiently outside the border, and if it is, we expand it. If it's not, we say, hey, this was a little bit too big for comfort. When this thing gets downscaled, it might not have enough of a border to prevent some aliasing artifacts on some anti-aliasing artifacts. That's all we're doing here. So we either expand or snap to a particular tile dimension. Now here's one thing I will say. These are all relative to the tile. Important to remember that as we flow through here, right? So we're looking at the min X, max X, min Y, max Y, and we're processing all of those. When we get down to the end, what we want to do is call extract image here, and what that's going to do is copy this out. Now, extract image is a prime candidate for a bug. We're going to want to look at that closely. The reason I say it's a prime candidate for a bug is when we look at what happens in here, these are happening the same in both paths. It doesn't mean the bug isn't there. The bug still could be there. The reason the bug could still be somewhere in there is because we could be seeing something where if, for example, we pass a specific type of dimension to the downsampler, it screws up, right? We know we aren't passing any weird dimensions to the downsampler in the other case because we're only extracting the amount of the image that is the entire, we're only ever picking out entire 1024 by 1024 source art or whatever, well, I don't remember what it was, 2488 by 20, whatever it was. We're only picking out that one size for environment tiles. So we would never see a bug if there was a bug in the downsampler where, say, non-power of two sizes caused a bug, uneven sizes caused a bug, things like that. So we don't know that the downsampler is right, and we're going to have to look at that. But extract image is possibly the more likely candidate because we know that that's completely different. I don't think extract image ever happens, or does, oh, well, no, I lied. Extract image does happen. So nope, take back everything I just said. So it has to be something with how we're passing down the information then. These things must behave poorly on certain parameters because we are calling extract image in both cases. Okay. So let's go look at these two. We assume the bug is in one of them. We don't know which one it is. Maybe it's in neither, but we're about to find out. So let's take a look at extract image. That's what runs first. First thing it does is push an image onto the temporary processing stack, which is just scratch memory that we're using for the purposes of an individual import. And what you can see here is it takes the dimensions out here by looking at one past the X and Y. Maximum subtracting the minimums from it. Perfectly reasonable way to get the size of the image. Don't expect a lot of trouble there. We then pull out the destination pixels from whatever got allocated during the push image call. We get the source row by looking at where we actually wanted to start at the end, because remember we want to flip the image since they come in backwards. So we intentionally advance in that way. Now looking at this, I also don't see any particular reason why that would be causing the problem that we're seeing offhand. We know we're going to be writing this much stuff in there because here's the result width and height that are used during that extraction process. So it certainly seems reasonable. We're stepping to the last row, and we're using the source image width as the stride, which is what we would use, and the min x is pushing us forward to the x position. Looping over the x and y, we're just starting at the source pixels, running through them. On each time we step backwards one whole row, that is what we would expect. We're copying up as many of them as there are here, so desc pixels should line up properly each time. Again, really not seeing a lot of explanation about why something would be wrong there. Now, one thing I would say is, did we check to make sure we're actually passing the image that we prepped? So for example, here we've got a tile image. Are we make sure we're passing it? We are passing it to downsample. We then take the dest image here and pass that. Again, that's what we want to see happening. I just want to make sure we weren't then turning around and like passing the wrong thing in. So we're going to be calling downsample. We can see if there's any obvious bugs in downsample here. Let's take a look. Here's the downsample call. The downsample call takes the image that is supposed to be downsampling, and it returns, as far as I can tell, this we no longer do. Okay. As far as I can tell, it's doing the downsample in place. So it's ruining whatever the input image that you give it is. That should be fine, but we would kind of have to think about, is there any reason why that wouldn't be in this case? I don't think so, because it's the tile image that got passed in, so it should just be able to ruin it, because it's not getting used for anything else. I don't think anyway why there would be a reason for that. So let's take a look at what's going on here. We come into the downsampler, excuse me, and each one of these runs is going to do one step of the downsampling. The first thing we do is we snap however much the dimensions of the image were originally. We go ahead and halve both of those, so we're going to cut them down in half. We then go through and do our downsample here by 2. And let's see how we do that. We have the destination pixel, source pixel 0, source pixel 1. We advance by whatever the width was to get to the next row, and otherwise we're just going to be doing downsampling directly in exactly how you would expect it to do. And I don't see a lot there. We're writing into the same place as we're reading, so that's a little something to watch out for. But in this particular case, there isn't a lot of reason why that would cause a problem, because we're always reading first and then writing, and we're writing a smaller thing than we're reading. So we shouldn't be having a lot of problems with that I can think of anyway. But we'll have to be on the lookout for it. So the first thing we do is we lift up pixels from both of our source and destination. We read 2 pixels at a time from both the current row and the next row, and we record those. We then convert them to color information we can actually use. So you can see this unpack and then linearize, right? We blend, we sRGB them into a single piece of information there we can pack down. We pack down, and we write out a single destination pixel for each of those. What that means is we're going to write out width worth of those, which is what we would expect, because we go ahead and write the result width and height at the end of that. So what I will say is this looks completely broken to me. I don't even slightly understand how this was working. Because if you look at what's going on here, source pixel should really be source row, because adding the width is going to skip a line, but this already read a whole line. So it assumes, yeah, so really this needs to be, and I can see we were being clever. We were being way too clever there. We were assuming that we would always read the whole line, but we won't, because if this number is odd, then we will have missed 1 pixel, right? So that's almost certainly where our bug is coming from. Just sloppy, I shouldn't have done that. So what we really want to do here is this. We want to call this source row, and we want to call this source row like so, right? And what we can do, because we only really need 1 source row pointer, is we can probably just do this, because that will be accurate. And that way we know we can get 2 pixel pointers out of 1 base pointer. But basically what I'm saying here is let's take the row that way, where we're starting off at the top. And then when we go here, what we want to do is advance by 2 rows every time. So we want to go ahead and do that. And that will be correct every time, even when this fails to read an entire row, which will be whenever this is odd. So that was almost certainly what was happening there. And so hopefully I've corrected that now. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's go ahead and try running a reimport, and this will reimport everything, which is good because we can see whether we broke the other case as well. Remember, we have 2 cases, like I was saying. We've got the case where we're importing something that's an entire PNG that just gets shoved into a texture after downsampling. We have the other case where we've got tiles. Those tiles are extracted. That's just to provide the artist with a little bit of an easier export path so you don't have to do as much funny business there. So now we're running re-export. The re-export will be very slow because we're in debug mode, and debug mode is very slow. A lot of our stuff doesn't seem to get optimized properly in debug mode, like doesn't seem to be code gen very efficiently. So I probably should have switched to release mode to run it, but hey, it's not that big of a deal. So this is going through right now, and you can kind of see it hopefully here. You can see us chewing through these files here, bouncing around on the CPU as we load and go. Of course, there we go, and now we're back. So looking at what we've created here, oh my goodness. Okay, well, we fixed the striding bug, I can tell you that. It's a little bit of a large cat, if we're honest. A little bit, maybe, bigger than I was expecting. But that's fine. All right, so let's go ahead and see about the rest of it. So here's the cat. It's now the correct everything except for size, I think. And so I think we've fixed that problem. And so we can now have arbitrary cats in the game as we wish. But we will have a couple issues that we have to address. So as you can already see, the cat is not lined up properly, although we can switch the cat's direction just fine. But the cat is not lined up correctly, specifically because we don't actually have any hot point specified, so it's just centered around the middle of wherever the point was that you said you wanted things placed. Which means that the code that we've got in there right now to deal with the hero's placement, which was all just kind of ad hoc for whatever the random sprite hero was, that stuff now needs to get fixed, right? We need to have a way of specifying those alignments, and that's probably what we want to do tomorrow, right? But for the moment, it's pretty easy for us to switch which cat we are. For example, like we're the Berman right now. Maybe we don't want to be the Berman anymore, for example. And so since that's the hero in this particular case, what we can do, well, you know what? Why even bother? Why not just strew some cats around the orphanage? We can put each of the cats around the orphanage if we want to. It's pretty easy for us to do, actually. So maybe we want to place some cats in the orphanage. Again, haven't really worked on that part of the code much, the placement code. But we can hack something in just to place some cats just because we want to. That's actually pretty easy to do. Well, you know what? We'll do it tomorrow if it's worth the Q&A. No sense belaboring it. So I think we're good. It seems like everything worked just fine, and we fixed the one bug that we had. So we're in good shape tomorrow to be able to place characters around. And And I think what we're going to want to do tomorrow then is just place some cats around to make sure that we can set their tags properly. We can put Krampus in there too. Just put those characters around, and they're all going to be disjoint and discombobulated. So that'll give us a good motivation to make a little way inside the game that we can update the HHA to just reflect the hotspot of the individual characters, right? Vetiverfo, I don't really understand the size bug. Don't you ask for a specific size when you push the hero sprites? Yes, so here's some stuff that's just been in the game for a long time because, you know, we just been making engine stuff and our goal was not really looking at art assets, but we've switched now. So we have to think about them. The hero sprites that were imported originally, we didn't even write any import code to actually clean up the boundaries on them. So what happened was the hero sprites were giant, blank, like huge empty space, and then a little sprite in the middle of it. So actually, we've been drawing huge, blank, transparent nothing with a little sprite in the middle of it for the hero, right? Now our import path properly looks for, you know, for all the new stuff we've done, it's like a real, you know, real in quotes. Obviously, it's still pretty simplistic because it's just 2D importing, but it does a lot of stuff now, right? It looks through packed art assets, it picks out the rectangle that's actually being used, it downsamples it, does all this stuff. As a result, the actual region of the sprite is now just filled with stuff. So the big empty size, right, that we were drawing before is now filled entirely with cat. So the cat is like twice as large as the hero because it doesn't have any blank border in its sprite like it used to, right? So that's where that's coming from. But that's good because now it means when we specify a size, that's the actual size we'll get. We don't have to make big empty sprites to account for the fact that most of it's empty space, right? I'm having trouble understanding the difference between a tag and a basic type. So there is no difference between any of them. They were kind of an arbitrary thing that we decided and how we wanted to do stuff. There is no such thing as a basic type. It's just another tag. The only reason that we decided to make it special was because we wanted to have one thing that was sort of immutable, meaning it can't be fuzzily picked. So for example, if you want a body, it has to be a body sprite. If you want a head, it has to be a head sprite. We decided to treat that tag specially and never allow cross-selection, whereas all the other tags can be cross-selected. So if, for example, you say you want a floor, right? You might get any kind of floor, right? Or sorry, a block or something, right? You might get any kind of block, like grass or stone or whatever can be matched across, but you'll always get a block. You won't get like a head sprite instead of a block because its tags matched better, right? So it's just a way of simplifying how we were deciding to structure those things. Vitomix, just wanted to thank you for the link to pseudo band limited pixel art filter. It was exactly what I needed. Excellent. Someone emailed me separately and was asking me something, and I was like, here's what you probably want to read. And I guess that worked for them, so that was great. Pulp user, when issue an OpenGL DirectX call, creating a workspace, for example, that takes a while to complete, will the CPU be busy while the GPU makes it happen, or will the thread be suspended so that Windows can schedule something else? So it's impossible to really know what's going on there without looking into it specifically. Usually OpenGL and DirectX calls don't block based on the GPU. They usually block based on the CPU, but not always. So most of the time, if an OpenGL DirectX call is taking some time, it's actually the CPU doing something. For example, when creating a vertex buffer, it may be playing with like how it's mapping memory and deciding where you should put that particular vertex buffer and things like this. So usually you're not waiting around on the GPU. Usually waiting on the GPU requires you to actually ask to wait for it, such as calling swap buffers, which may wait if you're too many frames ahead, or some kind of a sync call, like if you're waiting on a fence or something like that. So usually they try not to wait, but sometimes they do. When you do have to wait, yes, usually your thread would have been suspended if the drivers support that sort of thing, as far as I know. I don't think you will spin lock. But again, that kind of depends a little bit on the driver. So I don't really know in all cases whether you can be scheduled for something else or not. That's probably a little bit driver specific and implementation specific. But if I understand correctly, since the sprites are clamped depending on the space that's actually occupied, doesn't that mean you'll need to adapt the sprite dimensions to the sprite that is being drawn? Not really. Well, I guess I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry. Can you be more specific about what you're actually asking about? I can try to answer that. Can you pet the cats? Possibly. Serial PBM. Why not make the HHA file generator also load the files and generate the tags? So I do think I would probably add that. I probably compile into both, but I want it compiled in the game as well, and that's just so the artist can do something like hit F5 and reload art assets. So I want it in the game as well. But I would also like what you're saying. I would like the HHA to compile that in as well at some point. It's not a high priority right now, but I would like that. OpenGL or Vulkan for a complete beginner? OpenGL, Vulkan has no reason to exist. I'd just skip Vulkan entirely. Learn OpenGL, Direct 3D, or Metal. But never Vulkan. Vulkan's useless. What would it look like if you activated the snake code now and make them cats? Just seeing cats walk around randomly in their rooms will be so cool. Just adding random stop and lick your paw calls, and you basically have created life. Or I should just deal with having to wait for more. Yeah, just wait for having to wait for more. Because the snake code isn't even still in there, really. I mean, not the snake behavior is, but I mean the placement code isn't. Advice on logging events or core dumping in case of games crash in a customer's machine. I guess the question is how to prepare for helping customers who have the game crashed. Okay. So I thought that Steam would do that for you, but I then also think that there was some weirdness, like they didn't update it for 64-bit or something. So now I'm not sure. My answer should be Steam will do that for you, but I don't actually know if it does. Veteferfast says, I mean that the idle sprite, body sprite will be smaller in pixels than the dodge left, for example. So if the sprite dimensions you send to the graphics cards are the same, won't the dodge left sprite be squashed? So yes and no. The thing that makes that not happen, or rather that will allow us to make that not happen, is that in the texture itself, we actually store the width and height in pixels. I don't remember where the texture definition is. There it is. So when we go to render it, we actually can adjust for how many pixels it was, and that will allow us to prevent that problem, right? So you're not wrong. We do need to make sure we handle it properly, but I believe we will be able to. We'll see when we get there. Let's see. What's wrong with Vulkan? Search the archives. I think I've ranted about it on the stream before. Thank you, Casey, for giving both debuggers a try. Even though Cookout failed really bad this time, I'll give it best for Windows support. But I don't know about the VS as a standard thing. So basically, I guess what I would say is it should come with Visual Studio key bindings by default as an option. Like you should be able to select that because it's pretty easy to provide that feature. And then it just needs to, it seems a bit crashy right now, so it needs to be cleaned up and reliable. Your debugger can't crash, right? You need to not have, even Visual Studio manages to not crash most of the time. it needs to be reliable, right? So, but fixing those two things in it, I would love to give it another shot. How do you approach a bitmap that needs to be generated frequently on the fly? Would you add it to your asset system and reference it through your asset system, or would you skip the asset system in that case? Well, if it's generated, then you don't really need it to be in the asset system, probably. Although it probably still wants to go through at least some layer of the asset system to make sure that it knows that it's occupying a texture slot, right? I don't know. I mean, one way to answer that question would be our lighting fits that description, and it's got its own special path, right? So between DirectX and OpenGL, which one would you recommend for a beginner? Probably Direct 3D 11. Super off topic, can you offer me an explanation as to why there have never been PS2-based PC controllers, since it's the specific input port that sends CPU interrupts? I don't understand what you mean. Like, the plug isn't even compatible, but... Oh! You're not talking about PlayStation 2. You're talking about the actual PS2 plug on the back of some motherboards from the old days, like for keyboards and mice. An explanation as to why there have never been PS2-based PC controllers for those ports, I don't know enough about the ports, but my suspicion is that they don't get pulled frequently enough. I don't know. I don't know. There are PS2-based keyboard controller things, aren't there, that are pulled frequently in some special motherboard way, I thought. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question. It's an interesting idea. I just don't know how many motherboards support it, that support high enough frequency polling of those. How long does the VOD of an episode usually take to come online? About a day. I upload them pretty soon, usually after, and then, you know, YouTube posts them several hours later after the, like, processing's finished or whatever. So, yeah. All right. Looks like the end of the questions. So I think we're good. Oh, one more we'll close on. How do you like the progress of Handmade Hero so far? It's pretty good. You know, I mean, for something where I only get to work on it a very few hours, I think we built some pretty nice stuff in the engine. It's in fact maybe getting to the point where it's a little bit too far along. So we're kind of getting into stuff that's game designy now, and that's not really my area of expertise. So I guess what I would say is Handmade Hero has progressed to the point where it is going to exceed what I would have liked to have taught on stream. You know, I'd like to get the game running reasonably well as a game, just to like go through and re-clean up engine things and fix things that never quite got finished, and you know, to just like do an entity system, a nice entity system in there. You know, the things that are only game related, which is kind of what we're starting to do now. So I obviously want to do those things, but you know, again, like we've kind of progressed to the point where it's definitely crossing over into game design territory now, which is, you know, not really my thing. So I guess what I would say is we're sort of starting to transition over to a place where I'll start having a lot of disclaimers at the beginning of the stream. I'll be like, all right, we're going to do some stuff that's more or less just game design today, and I don't do game design, so ignore this episode. Except for the parts where we touch the engine, right? All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the stream. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining me for the episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along the series at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code. So you can play around with it too and learn some stuff, hopefully. Learn some game programming stuff. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow for, I guess what I'd like to do is start to take a look at that hotspot editing stuff. That's the last part of the importing I can think of that we haven't handled yet. Most of the other things, it seems like we've done. And so I'd really like to take a look at how we want to do that. Just basically being able to modify the HHA to have our own hotspots that we sort of adjust in the game. And go from there. So we'll take a look at that. And then after that, I think we're kind of back to room gen lighting sorts of stuff where we're going to have to start looking at bringing the world together, adding features we want there, ground cover, those sorts of things that we will now want to do, and other things like that. So that's it for today. Hope to see you back here for tomorrow. Till then, have fun programming. I'll see you guys on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.